Hi, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jason Shepard. Welcome to the first quarter 2024 AFCOM Southern California chapter's educational series webinar. Really excited to have two industry rock stars on with us today, with Tim Crawford and Kleyman, and Tim on today talking about the CIO Playbook, CIO trends here in Southern California, and then Bill with his role with AFCOM's national organization and taking us through the data center 2024 State of the Data Center Industry Survey. So what I'm going to do first right now is I want to ask the board members we do have on today to introduce themselves. Di, why don't we start with you?
Did you say Di or Brad?
Di.
Di. Hi, everybody. Diane Krehbiel Delson. If you don't know me, I've been in recruiting for 20 years. I own DKKD Staffing. Our focus is Southern California, yet we provide staff all over the United States. As I mentioned in my newsletter recently, 2024 has already proven to be indicative of past hiring trends prior to pandemic. Where executive roles were hot, and now the needs have kind of shifted and slowed down. We staffed many leadership roles in the first quarter, and now it's more focused on upgrading systems, securing them, and hiring tech support people. Consulting roles have also been very crucial in fast-paced hiring needs and filling gaps. Challenges continue to not be enough qualified and/or available talent based on the client's needs. Tech and consumption of tech continues to grow, as well as filling and managing diversity. Top challenges: available, qualified talent in the salary range, on-site, and hybrid instead of remote these days, staying ahead of the game with ever-changing technology, and keeping your employer happy and safe. The good news for data center folks is there's a big push for bringing manufacturing back into the United States. I was on a webinar the other day for Cathay Bank Economic Development, and they're saying that there's a big push, like I said, for manufacturing companies being built in the United States, ideally in India, chip manufacture. That'll help our data center folks when it comes to lack of supply and demand. And we need to be able to adapt for growth, AI. We have to be adaptable to all of it, the security. And hopefully all of this is going to help our data center folks. And on to our speakers today.
Yeah. Thanks, Ty. Just backing up a slide here to what our agenda is today. Again, we've got our open announcements. Di just gave her update on the IT recruiting side. We're going to have Tim Crawford go first after a few more news slides on our end, and then followed by Bill. Again, causal relationships, what's going on the IT side, which impacts the IT operations data center side downstream. Just a couple of things, and we do this at the beginning of every one of our calls, is that our chapter, AFCOM Southern California chapter, our constituents, our community, are all the Fortune 1000 companies that are headquartered here, all the publicly traded companies in Orange County, San Diego, Los Angeles, Inland Empire. And one thing that you'll not notice on this list, you don't see any of the big hyperscalers headquartered here in Southern California. You're not going to find the Googles, the Facebooks headquartered here in Southern California. We've got the banks, the insurance companies, the bioscience, pharmaceuticals, manufacturing facilities. Our community are the IT teams and the data center operations teams for these enterprise organizations. And so when we actually go back through with Tim and Bill today, our questions are, hey, how does this impact the enterprise IT operations communities here in Southern California? A couple of things. We just went through Di's IT recruiting update. I'd also like to have Brad from our team. Last fall, our third quarter meeting, Brad took us through, hey, what are the long lead time items for data center infrastructure? Brad, has this changed much since then? And can you give us kind of an update?
Yeah, I would say a lot of things have changed, especially on the large side. If many are probably aware, and if you do or don't read any of the journals, say Wall Street, if you watch CNBC, you'll notice kind of the top words are AI, tech, and data center. And large hyperscale data centers are at a in demand right now. The problem is we don't have power in this country to support the needs. So the desires of the hyperscalers outweigh what the utilities are available to provide or willing to provide at this point in time. So we have to do an electrical infrastructure upgrade, which does not happen overnight because substations, they don't keep them on a dock. They've got to be built, and they don't build that many per year. So for large scale data centers, it's going to be a slow start. There's a long line of people. I would say as we go down from that, the medium voltage switchgear, large generators, 2 meg, even 1 meg block UPSs, probably have some of the largest lead times. Probably the UPS has the best lead time out of all of them, but switchgear and medium voltage is a real pain right now. And we're at least a year, if not longer, depending upon who you ask. The good news
so Brad, what are the current lead times for UPS, new UPS gear?
That's where I was going next. It really depends on what you're ordering. If you are looking for smaller systems, I'd say 500 kilowatt and less, you're looking at, I don't want to say reasonable, but a lot better than it's been the last few years. So you can get them within 20 to 30 weeks. The lead times are changing a little bit based upon the components. At one point it was breakers, now it seems to be a bit on the batteries. The smaller the systems get, the better the lead times get. The problem really is the large systems for UPS. Transformers still we're backed up on some of those data center grade, meaning 500 kVA and less. Transformers still have at least 20 to 40 week lead times. And that's, again, just depends upon which manufacturer they're going to and if it's a name that is known within the computer or the data center industry. So things have gotten better since COVID, but a lot of things have gotten worse because of AI, and that's going to be, I think, a trend for at least the next 4 to 5 years.
Yeah, and if for our viewers, if you wanted to go back and last year we had in one of our webinars, we had Cache Valley Electric on to talk about the long lead times for utility scale transformers, and I think that's even gotten worse, right, as far as lead time for transformers in the utility industry. So thank you, Brad. Now, so I want to be able to do is share a few trends here, some of the highlights, right, that are going on in the industry. Hit a couple power slides and then transition into Tim. But this was an article that was in the Wall Street Journal literally this past weekend, for those who subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. But literally the headline, big tech, is the latest finding its obsession, right, with finding energy. The AI boom is creating an insatiable appetite for electricity, which is creating challenges for the grid. Also, the transition to clean energy sources. Another article that just came out this month, AI demand and limited capacity are driving up data center pricing and co-location facilities, 19%, right? So we're really seeing these pain points hitting the data center sector. Now, in my day job, again, I've been on the board here with AFCOM Southern California chapter for about 9 years now. But in my day job, I'm a location analyst, site selection specialist, and acquisition disposition specialist for data center capacity for a firm called Cressa, where I run the data center practice. These are some of the statistics from the power industry that we are tracking. So talking about overall generation, if you're to say right now across the United States, all this demand for new data center build, all these different markets across the country, well, there's 175,000 megawatts, right? Currently under development from the power industry standpoint. Just 30% of that power is on the actual Western power grid, what we call the interconnections, right? So the question is, hey, there's a lot of power that's out there that's coming online, but is it the right type of power that's going to be match well with the data center industry? Now, and by the way, in California, that's just 15%. But of that 175,000 megawatts, roughly 70% of that is wind or solar, which is fantastic. We're adding green electricity to the grid. The challenge is that what happens when that power, what happens when it's not sunny? What happens when it's not windy, right? Without battery storage for this, what type of stability is there for generation capacity in the grid? And I'll put that over to Tim and to Bill when it's time for them to speak as well. Lastly, or actually 2 additional points before we transition here. If you look at power rates right now across the country, on average, commercial power rates are 40% higher than industrial rates. Typically, it's when you own your own utility substation. However, nationally, just 7% of customers are on those lower industrial power rates. So when you start getting in a sticker shock relative to looking at your power bill today, and here's an example, this is Southern California Edison's power rates. If you have a 3,000 amp service to your building at 480 volts, 60% load. Now in data center speak, that's the same thing as saying 1.5 megawatts of critical load at a 1.3 PUE, or call it 10,000 square feet of raised floor at 150 watts per square foot, right? So, these are putting, just building blocks, okay? So 3,000 amps of power, your annual electricity bill with Southern California Edison in 2019 was $1.5 million. Today, that would be $2.3 million. So the rates have gone up 52% with Southern California Edison in the past 5 years. That's kind of an ouch factor. Now, if you were to compare that to the industrial rates nationally are 40% higher. Edison's a lot better, but it's still 27% higher. The commercial rates are over industrial rates. So you can really add value to your organization by understanding where you can get more affordable power across the United States, or transitioning your load from one market to the next, right? Balance out you don't have to have all of your racks in LA, right? For instance, you could do some in Phoenix where you can get 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour, right? So these are all things that take in consideration when you're evaluating different data center locations. So now what I want to be able to do is talk real quickly about the topics that are being discussed at these different industry events. So you may remember, for those that participated in our second quarter webinar last year, we reviewed all of the different sessions that happened at the annual PTC conference in Honolulu, and also the data center world topics. So the top 4 topics, common themes of interest between these 2 industry events. Number 1 last year was sustainability. Number 2, supply chain. 3, cloud. And 4 was AI. This year, what we're looking at, this is for the upcoming Data Center World Conference in a few weeks in Washington, D.C. If you'd like to register for this event and there's still availability, there is the actual link for you to go to the event and register. But what I'm showing on the screen here are the different topics that are being covered at Data Center World. I'm not intending for you to read this. I'm just asking you to look at different color codes, because these match the same color codes I was just showing you. And so when I scroll through this, you can start to see, wow, you're starting to see a lot of brown, a lot of green, etc. So now I've color coded these are the industry discussion topics that are going on at these various events. Number 1, it's a lot of discussion at PTC, a lot of discussion happening at Data Center World about bandwidth, the telecom challenges that we're facing in this hybrid world today. Number 2, it's the power, infrastructure, energy considerations. 3 is AI. And 4, cloud, surprisingly, is kind of dropping down the list a little bit. Right? So that being said, I'd like to transition now to Tim. And Tim, I'm going to stop sharing so you can share your screen.
Sounds good. So first off, thanks everyone for joining, and I'm honored to be able to present my thoughts here on the playbook, the CIO playbook.
Hey Tim, let's pause for 1 second. I just want to ask for our viewers for today, if you can type whatever questions that you have. We're going to leave 10 minutes at the end for Q&A for both of our panelists. But if you'd like to type in specific questions, do so in the chat. And Brad from our board will be following those along so we can ask those specific questions at the end. Sorry about that. Tim, back to you.
No worries. Thank you. And again, thanks for having me. This is always a great conversation to have, especially with this group of folks. So what I'm going to try and do is very quickly kind of gloss through some big heavy hitting items that are facing CIOs, not just here in Southern California, but across the globe. And so this is compiled from a lot of different information and conversations that I've had. Now, let me do a baseline first. When you talk about or look at what CIOs are focused on, they're focused on the big three. And the big three are pretty straightforward, and I'll dive into these a little further, but it's essentially the customer journey, the employee journey, and then your business operations and supply chain. And within each of those, there's a whole subset of components that have to be considered. Now, you might be saying, so why do I care? I'm kind of in the infrastructure space, or I'm a little far removed from this. And the reality is you need to understand this so that you can understand how this is driving decisions and some of those points that Jason made about trends coming from the top and from that customer-centric viewpoint down into the decisions we make around applications and infrastructure. So, the customer journey, it starts with the pre-brand before they even engage with your company. And then, of course, you see the common things around go-to-market, sales, and then all the way to alumni after they're done working with you, but then have decided to continue to promote your brand. And then the next piece to that you have to understand is the employee journey. And this is something that probably most folks can directly relate to, which is how companies or how individuals think of companies before they even apply to a job. And Di, this is kind of speaking into your world a little bit more, but going through that process of how an employee plays a role in this. And so, of course, it all comes together through the business operations and supply chain, right? These work hand in hand with one another. And when you start to understand these relationships, you start to understand how each of the next set of components that I'm going to share with you kind of come together. So looking beyond the big three, what's top line for the CIO agenda? And the first thing is financial management. And we saw this in 2022 at the very end. Starting in August, September, things were okay. By October, there was a lot of questions coming up as to where we're going from a financial standpoint. November, people were really starting to get squeamish. By December, okay, they packed up shop and they're going, okay, we need to pull back on our spend. And then going into 2023, you saw this hitting the budgets pretty steadfast. Now that changed quite a bit going through 2023 and has carried into 24. And that's going to affect a couple of the other things that I talk about here in a minute. Contract management. Whenever there's a downturn, you can always expect a CIO and their team to go in and try and renegotiate contracts. It's one of the few leverage points that you often get, and it's something you should always expect. And so sometimes it's pushing spend down the road, but the contract value stays the same. In other cases, it might be closing down a contract in the extreme example. The next one is around just simplification. I mean, IT is complicated. Even if you take any space from applications, infrastructure, networking, it's getting more complicated over time. Cybersecurity, more complicated over time. Generative AI, more complicated over time. I mean, just look at what we've done in the last, 16, 17 months and how quickly we've come through that. So simplification is going to be key as IT organizations kind of go through their planning. And then that kind of leads into decisions you make around strategic planning and what's important to your organization moving forward. It all starts with the customer and then rolls on from there. Risk is something that isn't often talked about within an IT organization in the same way that a board of directors or an executive leadership team would talk about. But talking about things like technical debt, cybersecurity, ransomware, those all fall under this umbrella of risk management. And it's going to be more important for organizations to be talking about this in the context of risk, as opposed to simply talking about it from a technology standpoint. The next one is operational insights. And this kind of hits to understanding what's happening before tragedy strikes. Really trying to get some insights into where things are going, how they're being impacted, both positive and negative. And then this also helps in your strategic planning, but then also as your customers move, you need to be flexible to be able to move too. No longer are we living in a world where we can put something in place and expect it to live for 3, 5, let alone 10 years. There are very few things that kind of rise to that ability to outlast that tenure. And then the last is ESG, and it's more focused on sustainability and governance when it comes to the IT organization and the CIO, as opposed to the social aspects. But this is something that's coming up. It kind of dropped off in 2023 as the economic situation started to fall behind. ESG also kind of dropped off a bit. But two things are coming back. One is regulation around sustainability and reporting, and the second is from a governance standpoint around data. And so that's something you'll want to make sure that you're keenly aware of. I mean, there are several specific state-based, here in the US at least, state-based AI legislation components that are in place. The EU just ratified the EU AI Act. And so there's even more that's in the hopper that's going through the paces. It's going to get really complicated really fast. And if all you did was ESG, my gosh, that's a mouthful in its own right. If we look at technology, specifically generative AI, right? And I don't want to dwell on this because I think there are a lot of folks that frankly are exhausted with talking about generative AI. But frankly, this is something that's going to drive decisions we make in terms of applications, architectures, and infrastructure, and how we think about using generative AI all the way from public cloud all the way to the edge. And when I talk about edge, just so I'm clear, I'm talking about the sensors, the individual devices that are sitting at the edge. I'm not talking about something that's intermediate in the process. Cloud is going to continue. I mean, you saw that in Jason's earlier slide. But I think we're finally getting to a point where the marketing shine is starting to wear off, which is a good thing. And we're starting to realize that cloud has a purpose, and it's not the purpose for everything. There will still be a need, and always has been, and will continue to be a need for on-prem solutions, whether it's within your corporate data center or more commonly co-location, because the corporate data center is becoming more complicated for organizations to have to manage. Cybersecurity, as I mentioned, is something that's getting a lot of attention. There was a publication, actually a press release by the SEC naming the CISO of SolarWinds. So they're getting pretty specific about calling people out and placing liability. And if you look at some of the new legislation that's coming out, it's calling out roles that are becoming liable for issues. So no longer can we go kind of fast and furious, and as I like to say, running with scissors. We got to be a little more specific about how we work. The network. The network is one area that, frankly, I don't think gets enough attention. I mean, I started my career networking over 30 years ago, and we saw evolution in servers and storage and data centers, but the network really didn't get the attention it deserved and needed. And we're just now starting to see that, and especially as generative AI starts to play into it, that complicated space is going to get a little more complicated, but I think we're going to start to see some really kind of novel things coming from it. And then the last is collaboration. And, Di talked a little bit about this in terms of hybrid workforce, remote workforce, in-person workforce, and how do we work together? Understanding how we work together is going to be really, really important. All right, so just a couple more items here. If we look beyond the technology, as I mentioned, return to office is a big thing. Silicon Dynamics are playing a big role. You saw the announcements, I'm sure, from NVIDIA's GTC event with the new Blackwell architecture coming from their products. Now they're saying that it's a more efficient architecture, which means it should produce better performance at a low power threshold. However, the demand for that kind of technology is just going up. So net, I think you'll see an increase, but we're starting to see how custom silicon and some of these new architectures are playing a role in our infrastructure and application architectures. Geopolitical rifts are a big deal. They've always been there, but they haven't got as much attention as they have in the last couple of years. And you're going to see this play out in terms of supply chain, software supply chain, infrastructure supply chain, as well as just network connectivity. How do you start to reroute traffic around legislative limitations, or even your supply chain around software development? What do you do? So there's a lot that comes into play here that CIOs have to contend with. I think I talked a lot about regulatory and compliance, and I mentioned ESG. So something to think about. Quantum. This is something, quantum computing is something that a lot of folks think is way out there, but it's actually starting to get some traction in the last 12 months. And there are some large enterprises that are starting to take advantage of quantum in production. And so I would expect that to get some legs, especially as they start to figure out how to compartmentalize it in such a way that it can be more approachable by the average enterprise. Specialized cloud is something that a lot of folks don't talk about, but I'm seeing it more and more. This is also in specific industries. So there might be financial services organizations that get together and build a cloud environment that is fine-tuned and specific to their needs, their industry, even though you've got competitors running on the same infrastructure. And then, of course, you've got the sovereignty specialized clouds as well. But I would expect to see more of this, especially as you think about the big hyperscalers. What they're doing is really providing a general purpose solution. The reality is that enterprises need more specialized solutions for specific applications. And that's really where specialized clouds come to bear. Now, just because it has the word cloud in it does not mean public cloud. And in fact, most of these specialized clouds sit in colo facilities. And then the last is robotics, especially as you start to think about things like oil and gas and dangerous industries where you need to take the human component out, or you look at even things like the assembly line. We're seeing a lot of work happening in manufacturing, not just heavy manufacturing, but general manufacturing around anomaly detection at the edge, and then all of the connectivity and even generative AI playing a role in that to be able to do anomaly detection on the sensor or at the device, as opposed to pulling that data back to some more robust technology. So these are some of the things that are coming up pretty quick in order, and things that CIOs are engaging with. But hopefully that gives you kind of a good, quick rundown of what CIOs are looking at, talking about, and working with, and maybe give you some insights as to where you can help in those areas. I put my website up here. The CIO Playbook in more detail is on the website, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
Thanks, Tim. Always amazing. We appreciate your insights you always bring to our chapter. Bill, let's go right into you. Make sure we've got enough time there at the end for Q&A.
Yeah, I appreciate that so much. Let me make sure that this is nice and shared. Give me just 1 second. There we go. Can you see my screen?
Can.
Oh, fantastic. Tim, that was phenomenal. I just, it was those moments where I got to sit back, relax, and enjoy that absolute soothing sound that is Tim Crawford. It was over a decade. I actually checked, Tim. It was over a decade ago that I first connected with you, and we sat on a panel, and I found a lifelong technology friend that's always fun to listen to. So a lot of really good insight there. I'm actually going to riff on that a little bit. I think you had some just absolutely just key points there. So thank you, Tim.
Thank you.
So a couple of really interesting things. I took some notes, and I want to talk about this really quick as Tim was talking about this, and Jason as well. First, hey everybody, I'm Bill Kleyman. I am the CEO and co-founder of Apolo, Apolo.us. We are a GPU hub with really extraordinary and intelligent tools for AI and ML development. Really focusing on AI sustainability, AI ethics, and AI transparency. And we're, I wouldn't say a startup, I would say a re-startup, and you're welcome to check us out. We're doing some really fascinating things around the stuff that Tim Crawford just officially announced people are sick of hearing about, which is generative AI. I'm also very honored and proud to be the AFCOM Data Center World Program Chair, and I do sit on the board of directors of the Chicago AFCOM chapter, contributing editor to Data Center Knowledge. And here I get a chance to help put on, honestly, one of the greatest shows, I think, in the data center industry, which is Data Center World, happening in Washington, D.C. And obviously getting a chance to spread some really interesting, fun facts and figures in the associated AFCOM State of the Data Center report. Now, you crew here are in for a special treat. We're going to go into some expanded findings from the report. Now, before we go on too much further, if I cough randomly or if I don't sound quite the 110% Bill Kleyman, it is because I had the flu. I'm just coming out of it right now. And we were just joking. I feel like Michael Jordan in that Bulls game, even though I'm not nearly as cool. I don't have a towel over my head, and I will not be able to score 39 points. But I will try and keep this as entertaining and lively as I possibly can. First of all, Omdia did a report recently, and Jason, this goes to what you said earlier as far as, like, power, just the concept of power and how much energy we're using. Omdia did a report. There was a really interesting measurement. Everybody listening, they actually measured how many tons of cards they shipped. It was the second quarter of 23, and Omdia said that NVIDIA had shipped 900 tons of their H100 cards. 900 tons. Now, if you in theory put all of those cards in action at one time, that is about 30 gigawatts of power, which let's just be very straightforward. That's an extraordinary amount of power, right? And really no one single market will ever have that many. And I'm gonna read you, before we go on any further, a really sort of amusing exchange that was between a Microsoft engineer and somebody who was in the co-location industry, where they spoke to a Microsoft engineer that's actually training the all-new GPT-6 cluster project. And basically they were complaining about having, and Tim, this is to your network comment, complaining having to provision a massive InfiniBand class network to link GPUs in different regions, the importance of that. And then the person asked, well, why not just co-locate the cluster in one region? The Microsoft engineer replies, well, we tried that at first, but we can't put more than 100,000 H100s in a single state without bringing down the grid. So as far as power constraints, they're real. It's here, and it's really a multiple of what we were used to. And to kind of answer your other question, fascinatingly, in the AFCOM State of the Data Center report, now I don't have this slide. I wish I had it, but I didn't. We asked the question of power. What are people looking at in terms of alternate and traditional power sources? And you're not be surprised, but nuclear energy, access to SMRs, was more than double than it was last year. So last year was about 10% of respondents. This year is more than a quarter of the respondents to this survey. They came back and said, we're going to look at nuclear energy as a direct complement to intermittent renewables, right? Because that's just what we have to use. And facetiously, a conversation out on the East Coast saying, when these new AI data centers come online, how are you going to support them? And a local utility said, we'll bring up coal power plants to support the most advanced technologies in the world. Personally, I think it's a little bit backwards. But the good news is I feel the industry recognizes the requirements here. And you're absolutely right, Tim. The stuff that they announced at GTC were just silly, right? They had a little robot named Groot. Now, I really think they need to work on their marketing there, because it was adorable, and they named him like General Robotics 00T. That's literally the name. But it was adorable. And honestly, Jensen Huang also realized that the limitations of something that he created obviously is extraordinary. He himself came out and said that some of our next DGX systems are going to be liquid cooled. Right, so using more of that direct chip, that unified silicon, that customized technology. And one more thing, as far as quantum is concerned, if I'm not mistaken, Equinix Tokyo has the first ever quantum machine in a colocation, actually available as quantum as a service, which is beyond awesome, right? When you could find the right use case and application. But again, everything that Tim talked about, this CIO playbook, this isn't like, hey, this is 3 years from now. These are things that you need to be absolutely focusing on. That was my intro. That was pretty good. All right. Let's get into the State of the Data Center report. There were some really interesting findings that we saw pretty much across the board. And one of them, again, Tim, you just did such a great job talking about this. But about 5 years ago, we're not really looking that far back. Everybody listening, we're not almost 60% of data center capacity was on-premise, in on-premise enterprise, corporate data centers. And looking 5 years ahead, we're going to see how hyperscalers and more traditional co-locations are going to account for more than half of that capacity, while we'll call it what it is. Legacy types of architectures and enterprise co-locations are going to drop to under 30%. Now, all of that is going somewhere. And Tim talked about this in a really important way. Now, like, is AI going to ultimately have an impact on this? And we're going to talk about it, but it's really that balance that we're seeing. And in the report that we asked, the question was, are we seeing a migration of workloads from cloud back to on-prem and subsequent impact on power load? And the answer is a resounding yes. Now, I don't want this to become a webinar where all of you go on your Twitter or X, I guess X, whatever it is, or LinkedIn and say, Tim and Bill are saying the cloud is going away. That is not what we're saying. What we're saying is that there's a balance and there's a purpose, and people are now deploying workloads with repatriation in mind. Just because it has to live in the cloud right now doesn't mean it needs to live there forever. And to that extent, we've asked this question now 3 years in a row, and every single year, respondents have come back and said, we are better understanding what needs to live on premise and what needs to live in the cloud. And so again, we're seeing these workloads start to move, and these are in the report. By the way, since you're an AFCOM member and you're listening to this, you have access to the report. I do recommend you read it, because we dive into what specific workloads are being moved. DevOps, ERP systems, productivity suites, like stuff that were by default in the cloud, are now getting a better life, or a better view at least, of having to live in an ecosystem that's other than a hyperscaler. And, obviously this is a new question that we asked. Are you seeing an increase in load? And again, the majority, only about 29%, said they're not really seeing any sort of impact. So 71% came back and said, yes, our clients, our workloads are, as a result, increasing the amount of load that is happening in our ecosystems. Now, obviously, how this impacts the enterprise data center, I think it's great. Nike should focus on making shoes, right? They should be not focusing necessarily on building massive data centers or co-location facilities that sometimes become inefficient or legacy to manage. They should be focusing on better parts of their business, and that's where the data center boom continues to proliferate. When we start to take a look at AI specifically, we talked about this, and I don't want to get into too crazy of a specific detail, but this was the first time we ever asked this question, everybody. We really were curious about it. And most respondents, 56%, are planning to deploy some kind of AI-capable solutions in their data center, most commonly to support, again, I'm so sorry, Tim Crawford, generative AI use cases, and again, to create solutions around that. I'm gonna pause here for a second. I do understand that it's a term that's getting tossed around like nothing out there right now. But the reality is that this isn't just a technology shift. Everybody listening, just pause with me for a second. Get off your Amazon shopping list. Follow me. This is a shift in humanity. This is as much of a fad as when we stopped, riding horses and started driving cars. As much of a fad as when we stopped, taking trains and started flying airplanes. Humanity is seeing a shift in how we interact with data, where for the first time ever, we can ask data a question and get a conscious answer back. I'm not talking like Skynet, but originally generated content. And that is an extraordinary feat that we can now accomplish with the technologies that we have at hand. Every single person in this call right now so far that has used Google or Bing is a user of generative AI. Period. That's how fast, like Tim said, over the past 16 months or so, this evolution has happened. We as a community have been trained to click on a blue link for the past 25 plus years. That's how we've been searching. That's how we've interacted with data, from SQL queries to obviously traditional search engines, Ask Jeeves, Alta Vista, Yahoo, maybe even Google. That's how we've always been trained. Now there's a big fundamental shift in that. And so that's why we're seeing this happen. Now, here's the big question. Now, in my organization at Apolo, we take data centers on a journey. We help them become, from legacy to a little bit more modernized. We've asked this question over the past, actually, since we started writing the report 8 years ago, the average rack density in a data center. Now, when we started asking this question, the very first one, 6 kilowatts. 6 kW per rack was the average rack density. Now, I have good news and bad news. The good news is that number has doubled. The bad news is that it's still not enough to support modern AI. unfortunately, right? Where we're seeing use cases now pushing like 40, 50, 60 kW per rack, where, you know, I'm glad that our industry is actively breaking that double-digit range, but remarkably speaking, it's still not enough. And so one of the things that we're seeing to accommodate some of these changes in rack density, what are people actually doing? Rear door heat exchangers have been an absolutely wonderful mechanism to support and increase basically levels of rack density. When we take a look at this kind of environment, so let's use that 12 kilowatt per rack as a reference. A 42U rack, inside one of those, you put a DGX node of H100s. It's going to consume 6 units. One of those is between 8 and 11 kilowatts. Just one. How many are you going to fit in a rack? It's not going to be that many, right? It's a whole bunch of blanking panels, and that's not very efficient. So we're seeing this, and this is going back to Brad, man. You're going to talk about supply chain. I do have some stuff on there. It's going to be a massive shift in terms of what people are actually ordering, not just to support data centers, but to support data centers at a massive multiple. We're asking some facilities to move from traditional 10, 15 kW rack into like 40, 50 to 60. And what's remarkable is that those ones that go on the journey, we have a partner out in Omaha, Nebraska, Scott Data Center, who did this, and they're being pushed by their own enterprise clients because they already have their critical workloads. So they're like, can you take my AI workloads as well? The traditional answer is how? How do we put that much power or density in what we've been operating on, you know, Citrix and VMware and SQL servers, and now you're asking us to take these on. So a part of it is learning and understanding how to increase density. I think this is going to be an industry-wide challenge. And the reality of the situation is every data center is going to become an AI data center. It's just kind of how quickly you can get there. There's a couple of other important things that I'm going to be shifting and pivoting a little bit here. We asked the question of selecting the right technology and what is this ultimately going to have on the data center. Now, actually, here's giving my second cough drop. Hang on. All right. That was better. The really interesting part about this, those top 4 that you see in this list, on-prem cloud services, edge computing. Oh, this goes back to Tim's point. We're not talking like public cloud. We're talking like specialized cloud, living in a colo. So Tim, thank you. I'm actually gonna use that a lot, the specialized cloud, so people can understand. But edge computing, and then high density and GPU hardware and services, and then obviously second life gear and so on. Those 4 are pretty new in the top 5. And fascinatingly enough, it's something that we were really curious to see, especially around high density and the GPU architecture, where folks are going to start to look at this. The impact on the data center is straightforward. There's no sugarcoating it. We are going to have to see a re-architecture of some designs and models for facilities to support this level of density. Now, I'm going to talk about something else. And again, Tim brought this up, security. I don't want this to be, a scary thing or anything like that. But we need to talk about a couple of things here. Ransomware has been the top of the list. I think we've been asking this question for 7 years, specifically this list. And for the past 7 years, it's been at the very, very top. I wrote an article on data center knowledge, which is titled "The Data Center Ransomware Attack That Cost You Everything." And as the title suggests, that's exactly what happened. It was a provider, data center and cloud service provider, that got one of its management machines infected and unknowingly transferred the VM to an internal network. And then, you know, all hell broke loose, basically. It completely down, and including clients' data as well. Give that a read, not to scare yourself, please, but if anything, to create a better level of awareness of just how much of a target we really all are. The other one that I want to talk about, for the first time ever, human threats, inside and outside threats, made the top 5, both of them. That's someone doing something accidental, and that's someone doing something malicious. We don't talk about physical security as much as we should. There were now actual commissions and meetings within the United States government and federal government, like FERC, for example, where they are emergency response. For example, somebody shooting at a substation as a part of critical infrastructure. And you better believe that right now there are congressional hearings seeing data center facilities as, let's be honest, very much critical infrastructure. Because if a facility goes down that's managing a hospital system, which we've recently seen what happens when a billing system gets impacted, there are massive repercussions for that. So human threats, interestingly enough, have been really important to follow, and something that we shouldn't, put in the back of our minds. I think that's very, very important. And again, ransomware, obviously something key to keep an eye on. All right, supply chains. Brad is I can see him. He's on the edge of his seat right now. And everybody else. So this was interesting because we keep asking this question, especially since COVID. That's when we really started asking this question. Every single year, we get a very much crazy majority. Basically, all respondents have experienced some type of supply chain constraint and issue. 93% is a remarkable statistic. And I mean, I pretty much didn't need this slide after Brad put up like it's 59 weeks for this nut and bolt. And it's not that long, but that's what it feels like. And what's really kind of fascinating is the statistic that's third right there. 21% have stated that they experienced an outage because of a supply chain issue. Last year, we asked that same question. That number was a quarter, so small reduction, but still sizable. Now, this tells me that we're not talking about a system-wide outage, right? Something happened because they didn't have a part, a component, a backup system that it took a part of their environment down. That's scary. And not to downplay it, obviously, but the tragic incident that happened in Baltimore Harbor, we didn't really bring it up too much. I don't know what the ramifications are going to be on our supply chain that is constrained, especially along the East Coast, and if it might have a trickle impact on Data Center Alley. I not something I'm sure about at all. Maybe something at the end, Brad, if that's something you see. I was curious about that as well. But supply chain is critical, and obviously any sort of delay to the weeks long challenge that is it already to get some of that gear. Especially in this era of boom for digital infrastructure, could really sort of constrain the market. And then finally, most importantly, people. The folks that keep all the stuff running. Did a great job talking about the importance of some of the shortages and where we can fill those gaps. And interestingly enough, a lot of overlap in a survey that's it's definitely not a staffing survey. And so what is my like pulse of the industry is your like arterial blood system, this stuff like the back of your hand. So us asking just a couple of questions, getting the responses, and then being validated by your findings was really interesting, actually. Data center engineers, people who understand and know how to operate these facilities are in it's something that's very much needed. MSOs was a really interesting, multi-skilled operators. It was a newer term, I think, that I've barely learned about. And these are individuals that have a great understanding of technology and a good business acumen as well. Sort of like the intermediaries that can do quite a bit, within these facilities. Very much sought after because their ability to translate business needs into technology outcome is huge. And you need to be able to understand that, first of all. That was a very special one, and that one's actually in the top 1 and 2 for the past couple of years now. Securities continues to be an important one. I think I might remove DevOps. Obviously, I think a lot of that's outsourced. I probably don't need that in the data center space. That's probably maybe the last year we're going to ask that. But obviously, telecom, sysadmin, and the management is in there. Those top 3 I found to be very interesting as far as like engineers, MSOs, and folks that can specifically support security. You know what? That's it. I'm going to give my voice a rest. Jason, I am going to pass it over to you because I think we've got a flurry of questions from this amazing community.
We do, Brad. I'm gonna throw it back to you. Have you been watching any of the questions that have come in? You're on mute, Brad.
There we go. We got a couple questions for you guys. First off is an easy one. Are these slides going to be shared? I know we are recording and reposting, or are there any slides that could be requested or might be available?
Well, first of all, Bill's slides are already available for AFCOM members online. This video will be uploaded to not only our YouTube channel, but it's also going to be uploaded to AFCOM's national channel, so anybody can review the video at their leisure.
Okay. Let's see. Raquel's got a question about testing being done on data centers and green power grids. Are there any testing being done on data centers or green power grids? I'm not sure I know how to answer that question.
So I mean, I want to say yes to an extent. Test. I don't know if the word test, like there's active. So microgrids are a good example of where we're doing a good unification between multiple different kinds of power sources. So if anything, I think maybe the microgrid architecture right now is a great test of green power delivery for the combination of, for example, intermittent renewables, natural gas, and other power sources that are all combined into this one little microgrid that can be then facilitated into a power environment. I know that there's more testing for data centers being done in Europe, for example, in the Nordics for hydropower specifically. Um, one of our partners, Notepole, and a couple of others have facilities out there that run 100% on hydro and hydroelectric dams. So there's capacity for that, and I think one of the big ones you're going to start to see between now and I would say 2029 behind the meter data center projects with probably SMRs built for them, so small modular reactors. I'm trying to remember this. There's a green
Yeah, Bill,
energy.
you're the SMRs that you're referring to that from a on-site cogeneration standpoint, not a utility scale SMR.
Maybe. I really don't know how like the challenge right now that we have, Jason, is that we don't have enough power, whether it's
Right.
utility
Bingo.
scale or behind the meter. In all honesty, it could be a combination of both of them. There's a project in Virginia, Green Energy Partners. They bought 641 acres. They're going to be building between 4 and 6 SMRs to support upwards of like 20 data center projects. And the other goal is to create hydrogen to backfill the Virginia grid. So there's a lot of these really cool projects in play, and I would honestly, I guess it's a test of green clean energy for data centers.
Yeah, I would take, maybe I could just add another comment in that I think the interest in green power grids and green data centers is going to skyrocket. And the reason for that is scope 3 reporting from a regulatory standpoint. Already starting to see that reporting happening in Europe. They've definitely taken the lead on it, but I fully expect customers to start asking about it of data center providers more and more. They're already starting to ask public cloud providers for that data to be able to feed it in for scope 3 reporting.
I've been waiting for.
But hold on, we're working from an outside in standpoint though. Let's talk about green, right? Nationally, there's 29 states that have renewable energy laws, right? With clean energy goals, right? So for example, California, 60% renewable by 2030, and then the balance clean by 2045, I believe. And so this is having a downstream impact on the power companies buying power on the open market from uh, IPPs, independent power producers, right? And so this is all from the outside in from a renewable green energy standpoint, and then internal within the facilities from the green energy standpoint. I don't know, Bill, if you can comment on this, but what Dean Nelson is doing, right, relative to tracking the actual utilization of through infrastructure masons of the actual tags in the back and what's considered to be green of the actual IT hardware, right? I can't speak intelligently enough about that piece, but I know it's happening.
Yeah, that's the iMasons Climate Accord. It's basically nutrition labels for data centers, right? Being able to quantify their power consumption, and that's still something that we're very much pushing forward. It's not easy that for an organization that doesn't do a great job, or an industry necessarily that doesn't do a great job self-regulating itself. It's we're not the best at it. How long it took us to agree on PUE?
Yeah. Well, and there's another direction on that too, Jason and Bill, which is you've got the work that iMasons is doing, but you also have another group. It's a group of CIOs that have gotten together to start sustainableIT.org. And so that is driving it from the consumption standpoint, from an application and leadership standpoint.
And to back that, Tim, I've been waiting for years. My clients have talked about it, but now it's finally happening, right? And there's so many things that the clients talk about, the industry talks about, and we're just finally seeing it happen. And it's just, to everybody else's point as well, AI, it's here. and somebody, I think it was Brad, you mentioned it, or Bill, I can't remember, was, we went from horse to buggy, right? It's inevitable. We have to adapt, and we need to do more on the green side for clients and just in general, right?
Well, I like the commercial out there that has the Alexa having an argument with Siri.
I think there's going to be a push and shove coming though. And that push and shove is going to be, there's going to be a drive for better power, cleaner power. But to Bill's earlier point about there's just not enough power, period.
Right.
You have to make a decision. Like, I mean, are you going to make your numbers from a sustainability standpoint for ESG reporting, or are you going to have the power to just get the work done? And those two are going to be in conflict with one another for some time.
Especially when
Brad,
the
do we have
power is
any
not
additional
there.
questions? We've got about 5 minutes left here.
Yeah. There's a one from Gil. Oh, hey, Gil, how you doing? It's been a long time. Gil asks, I think this is for you, Jason. You mentioned the difference between commercial and industrial power rates. And can the data center operators get industrial rates?
So commercial rates are typically the traditional version of power when, for example, Southern California Edison brings the power to that green transformer outside your building. The owner of the building actually puts the power panel in and then brings that power into the actual building. That is the traditional form of power delivery to commercial customers. Those are commercial rates. Industrial power rates happen when the customer takes power at subtransmission, right? Which means that they have their own substation. So that delta nationally, the delta in the pricing is 40%. On average is the difference in the power cost. So typically the ROI for building your own substation, depending upon which market that you're in, is just a few short years, right? But then you take on the risk of managing your own transformers, right, on site. But for heavy power consuming users, data center providers specifically, there's a definite value add to having your own on-site substation to get onto those industrial rates. Which, by the way, means that you need to be located along the actual power lines, right? At $1 million a mile to $3 million a mile above ground transmission extension lines. That's where it's really advantageous to identify where that power infrastructure is.
Thank you. And I think the next question from Tim. How you doing, Tim? It's been a long time. He says for Bill and Jason, is more of a comment about AWS acquiring a data center campus next to a nuclear plant, which I think is going to become very common when people are trying to find stranded power or any power capacity available. I think going to some sort of location that might have power availability is going to be where the next data center pops up. Hopefully they can get good fiber. But Bill, Jason, do you have any comments?
Yeah, I see Tim Elliott's comment. I see your comment, Tim, you know, and about that data center and what it's trying to build. I was at a conference last year in Austin. It was in Austin, DCAC. It was DCAC in Austin. And I remember sitting in the front row and JLL gets up on stage and they usually like to do forecasts in terms of transaction sizes and deals. And I've been in the industry for a while, right? I'm a millennial. I've been lucky enough that I wasn't adopted into the data center industry. I got a network engineering undergraduate. Go networking, people, Tim. And you know, I've been working in this space for some time, and so I've been used to like the traditional transaction sizes, you know, a few hundred kW, a couple hundred, you know, a megawatt or two here, 10, 20 megawatts. I remember when 20, 30 megawatts was kind of a big deal. And here comes JLL and puts this giant thing on the screen. And they say, we have now deal sizes, single transaction deal sizes of 300 megawatts.
So
yeah.
By the way, at PTC in Honolulu in January, I was involved in discussions, at least 4 or 5, where I heard the term gigawatt campuses. That's 1,000 megawatts. Let's just put that in perspective. 1,000 megawatts is a gigawatt. There were at least 4 or 5 of those discussions relative to new build campuses, right? Back to the comment as far as proximity to the actual generation. There's a famous Winston Churchill quote, which is proximity to power doesn't mean that you wield it. So I love that quote because unless you've got the distribution capability for that power to your site, which still requires you building your own substation for your own use, you're not able to utilize it. Then you have to like downstep that actual power, which is coming out of the actual power generation source, right? So the one thing I will say, however, though, is that most utility scale outages happen between the actual transmission to the distribution, right, to the customer. So the closer you can get to that source, the better. But again, that doesn't mean that you wield the power. You still have to kind of put in the actual infrastructure to downstep that energy for your use. And I know we have 1 minute left. So what I'd like to do is remind everybody that this video will be uploaded to AFCOM's website, our own chapter's YouTube channel. And I'd really like to thank Tim and Bill. You guys are, again, absolute rock stars in the industry. I'm so appreciative about your time. And Bill, I look forward to seeing you at Data Center World in a few weeks. We'll both see if we can get over our coughs and keep the cough drops away. But anyway, Di, Brad, thank you so much. Everybody, thank you for attending. And we will look forward to seeing you on our next webinar.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Everybody.